Today, on Running to Him, we as Christians are to live in righteousness, no matter what the outcome. Now, if you're joining us in going through Proverbs, today's reading is Proverbs 11, 1 through 13, and we will concentrate on verses 10 through 13. Well, Proverbs 11, 10 through 13 from the Lexham English Septuagint says this: By the good deeds of the righteous a city goes the right way, but by the mouths of the ungodly it is destroyed. The one who lacks understanding mocks his neighbors, but a wise man remains quiet. The double-tongued man reveals counsels in an assembly, but the faithful in spirit hides a matter. Now, much has been written about the struggles that we of a nation have been seeing in the pandemic of 2020. There have been riots, some politically driven, demonstrations for the self-determination, businesses which remained open in spite of governmental demands that they close, and a verbal argument on both ends of the political spectrum about the veracity of the recent elections. These activities have tended to divide the country even more than it was. Now that both sides are upset with me, let me explain. In verse 10, Solomon contrasts deeds versus words. There have been many churches and organizations and people who have stepped up during this pandemic and provided help for those in need. Most, if not all, were done regardless of the political persuasion of those in need. These actions built the country up. All truth is God's truth, so frankly, I don't care if someone does something good in spite of someone else or because they are following God's directive. Good is being done. Would I like to see everyone come to Christ and work through Him? Of course. But if the hungry are fed, I don't care how they receive the food. See 1 Corinthians 1, 24 through 31. I will not ask. But when a person spouts anger and hate through his words and action, then the city is destroyed. And this is the problem when two competing ideas scream at each other. There's nothing which they are doing which will bring about good. Now, I'm particularly disappointed in how some of the Christian community are behaving. I fully expect that non-believers will react in a certain way, but believers are not to act as non-believers. Ignatius wrote the Roman believers that they were not to attempt to gain his release from death, as it was better for him to live through death than to die through life. Another example occurred in Antioch in 387 AD. The Christians had rioted because of a new tax that the emperor had levied on the city. They rioted, tearing down his statues, resulting in the threat of his retaliation. John Chrysostom, a pastor in the city, preached a series of sermons as to how believers are to live. We are to look to do good, not evil. We are to recognize that it is within God's plan that things occur, both good and bad. God does not cause the bad to happen, but His plan allows for it. Now, how we respond as believers will determine whether we are focusing on God's plan or our desires. How we respond as believers will determine whether or not we are focusing on God's plans or our desires. Are we allowing God to work, or are we playing God and acting as Satan? We are to be righteous and act within the law. If our attempts fail, for whatever reason, then we are to move on in righteousness and joyously await God's coming glory. Thank you for listening. We pray that today's devotion was meaningful to you. We would love to hear from you. You can use either Facebook or YouTube to like, subscribe, share, and tell others about us. If you would like to contact us, you can reach me at phineasjacobus@runningtohim.net.